Hey, this is Brian Gibbons, and we're talking right now about agreements section, and we've got a ton of agreements. I think we've got over 150 of them. Okay, and one of the worst things in the world is to get, blown away by how do these agreements work, how do I fill them in, what agreements do I use when. So, when we first start coaching and getting your first deal, we help you with the agreements. But these are all the agreements that we deal with. Okay, there are a lot of them. Let's get started about the agreements that we use. We're going to deal with teaching you how to use your standard state realtor agreement. It's important that you use that agreement, especially when you're doing certain types of transactions. You need to know how to write it up. You need to know how to fill it out. What's the purchase price? What's a binder deposit? Making offers on bank properties, using weasel clauses, using a seller's attorney review, documents to include with your offer, things of that nature. And we also need to have you understand how to put an addendum on that standard agreement. What's a required lead-based paint disclosure that most states have. And then we give you these forms: purchase and sale agreement, memorandum, seller's landlord disclosure, lead-based paint hazards disclosure. And then we move into the next section, which is the flipping wholesaling section. This includes how to assign your purchase agreement, how to set up a double closing, how to find a title company that will do a double closing, because many of them won't do a double closing. You need a double closing title company. How do you do an assignment agreement? What does the HUD one look like on a flip? Authorization to release loan information. And then we move into retailing agreements, which is rehabs. And rehabs are with contractors. The big thing is what does that contractor agreement look like when you're negotiating repairs? So that's very, very important. What's the addendum to a listing agreement? And then we move into seller financing, which has got to do with one of our favorite seller financing ways to buy a property is to use the existing financing, and that's using subject to. Now, a subject to particular situation is we need to tell the seller that there's a due on sale clause, so we have a specific due on sale clause acknowledgement. Then we have a quick claim to the trustee using a land trust. We have an authorization to release mortgage information. We get a limited power of attorney, and then we have an escrow account. And what do you do if the mortgage company does call the loan due? You can send them off a letter. Okay, and then we move on to when there's existing financing and you want to buy the property, you can do a wraparound mortgage. And a wraparound mortgage has got to do with a mortgage document, and then a mortgage note, and then a wraparound mortgage rider. And those are just some of the wraparound mortgage documents that we use. And then we move on to contract for deed and agreement for deed. In all states, or even land contracts, Ohio's got one of the best land contract laws on the books. It says that if the buyer puts less than 20% into the contract, you can evict them if they don't pay you. So if they're late, you can go to landlord-tenant court and you can evict them. So we love land contracts in Ohio, and you can usually get a 10% down payment, and you can sell it quickly, and they've got a lot to lose if they don't pay you. So agreements for deed, you always want to buy on agreement for deed unless you have a state like Ohio where you can sell on agreement for deed. And you want to make sure that these payments, if you're going to buy on agreement for deed, go through a third-party payee. A third-party payee is somebody that takes the money and then gives it to the principal and interest, mortgage, taxes and insurance, and if there's anything left over, it goes to the seller. Okay? You want to record your agreement at the county courthouse on an agreement for deed if you're buying on agreement for deed to protect your interests. But don't ever sell on an agreement for deed or a contract for deed unless you're in perhaps Ohio. And so that you would have a agreement for deed, contract, you would have authorization to release that mortgage information, you would have a collection account agreement, third-party payee agreement, and you'd have an insurance letter to add an additional insured. Now we get to the exciting lease option box, because we love lease options here at REISkills. My first lease option I did was back in 1986, and I made about $18,000 as a 22-year-old kid. And that's a long time ago, but it was a lot of money to me. It was over a year's income. So I was really, really happy, and I just love lease options. So when you buy on a lease option, you can either lease it with an option from the seller and then do two things. You can sublease and sub-option and do what's called a sandwich, or you can assign the deal for a fee. Assign the deal for a fee. And that's what I love to teach rookies that have never done any real estate investing before. Don't do flipping or rehabs. Do lease option assignments first. Get out of debt. If you got $30,000 in consumer debt and student loans, get all that paid for. Does that sound like a good idea? Just get out of debt as fast as you can. So how do you set this thing up? Well, we have a lease option agreement, and then we have a collection account third-party agreement to collect these payments, because we're going to be sending it as a buyer and then sending it into the collection company, and then they're going to pay the PITI. If there's anything more, it goes to the seller. Lease option deposit receipt, insurance letter to add an additional insured, notice to renew the lease option, and notice to exercise purchase option. And lease options, now when you sell on a lease option, you remember this. If you remember anything, this is so important. Have a lease and a separate option agreement. But when you buy a lease option, have a lease purchase agreement or a lease option together in one document. Okay? Very important. Get those two agreements when you sell on a lease option. And what do you do when you do sublease options? What agreements do you use? You use that lease agreement. You use the purchase option for the tenant. When you sell on a lease option, you'd use a repair addendum if you are going to sell a property that needs work. You're going to have a tenant's lease deposit receipt. You got a receipt for the tenant's non-refundable option fee, and you're going to get an authorization to release the loan information. And again, lease options are one of the easiest ways to make money. Now we're getting into straight options, and straight options have to do with the option fee and how long you tie the property up, and the seller's right to continue marketing on a non-exclusive basis. So in other words, they can try to sell it and you can try to sell it. That's just a really straight option. So we have a standard option agreement and a notice to exercise option to purchase. Now, landlording. Now, a lot of people are afraid of landlording, and you really do need to be a good landlord to make a ton of money in real estate. So even if you hire a property manager, we give you all the forms to have your own little property management section in your company. What we have is a rental application and an application denial letter, standard lease agreement, standard lease deposit receipt, move in and move out form, and we highly recommend that you use video. And video is a very strong way of doing a good job proving the condition in case you have to go to landlord-tenant court, but still use the move-in, move-out form. Itemized security deposit deductions, prepayment rent discount. So if they pay on time or before, they get a discount, and notice of past due rent. Now, the next section is short sale agreements, and I don't know if you know anything about a short sale, but it's basically you asking the bank to give the keys back to them if they can forgive some debt. So basically, what we have is a package. We teach you how to put the package together. And then it includes an escrow letter and a seller's hardship letter, an authorization to release mortgage information, and a limited power of attorney. And then we have repair estimates and supply comparable sales, comparable sales for the lender, ordering a BPO or a broker's price opinion, submitting the package, and what if the bank says no, and then what do you do? So it really is teaching you about short sales. The next section is land trusts. In certain states, that land trusts are awesome. They're absolutely awesome. We love land trusts. I think land trusts are an integral part of having a real estate investing company. So what is a land trust? What's the purpose of using a land trust? Well, it's basically for privacy. Okay, there's very little disadvantages of using a land trust. Banks don't like properties in land trusts, so we generally, if we're refinancing, we'll pull it out of the land trust, get it refinanced, and then put it back into the land trust. What is a trustee in a land trust? What is a beneficiary? How do you operate one? How do you sell property that's in a land trust? Using a land trust as an investor, and you can even put it in as a homeowner. So what kind of agreements do we use? We use warranty deeds to trustees and beneficiary agreements, assigning beneficial interest form, and how do we direct to the trustee, where we send them a letter, and how do we get the trustee resigned or fired. We have a resignation of trustee form and a trustee's affidavit. The next section is about getting partnerships or joint ventures. Okay, what's the definition of a partnership? Well, I like dealing with doctors that are too busy, or dentists, or people that are just too busy. They have some lazy money around, and they go, okay, if I find a deal and bring it to you, and you buy it, you own it. Okay, I don't own it. But what I'll do is I will work for free if you give me an option that when you sell the property, we'll split the profit after you get paid back all your acquisition costs and your rehab costs. And that works out great. They love it. And I do they don't have to think about it. All we do is go over a cup of coffee and I tell them where the project is. So that's how we deal with partnerships or joint ventures. And so we give you the joint venture agreement and a limited partnership agreement. And that's the end of our contacts. We have a lot more, contracts. We have a lot more contracts available, but that are our key contracts we use every day. I think there's over 150 of those that I went over. I hope it's impressive. I hope you understand that we have a great library of agreements for you as a real estate investor. So our next section we're going to be going over is how can we build a contact team, whether it's builders or appraisers or contractors. How do we get bank lenders, hard money lenders? How do we get these contacts? How do we find them? What kind of marketing and letters do we send to these people? How do we find partners? So we'll look forward to that particular section. Okay? Thanks for listening.